Tonight on Louisiana, the state we're in.
They came from all over the country to New Orleans to talk about one thing: environmental injustices in their communities. Studies confirm that poor people and people of color bear the disproportionate burden of not only toxic waste facilities, but air pollution, lead poisoning, pesticide poisoning, and garbage dumps.
We just say it's a continuation of the trend of putting unwanted...
From LPD, this is Louisiana's premier news magazine, with correspondents R.C. Chapa, Jeff Dewey, and your host, Robert Collins.
Good evening and welcome to this week's program. This evening we'll be talking with one of the new members of the Louisiana Supreme Court, new Justice Revius Ortigue, who was sworn in this afternoon. He will be the first justice on the High Court of African American Heritage, and Jeff Dewey will have a profile on his distinguished career. But first, a few weekends ago, one of the largest environmental conferences in the world convened in New Orleans. The focus of the scientists, activists, and other concerned citizens was the Mississippi River south of Baton Rouge. Environmentalists the world over have referred to that area as Cancer Alley because of the concentration of chemical and manufacturing complexes along that stretch of the river. Environmentalists have long claimed that contaminants from more than 100 plants in that area have harmed the health of the people there. And those attending this latest conference wanted to have a look for themselves. R.C. Chapa went along on their bus tour of so-called Cancer Alley.
They've never met before, yet today they speak to each other as if they were long-lost friends. They came from all over the country to New Orleans to talk about one thing: environmental injustices in their communities. Studies confirm that poor people and people of color bear the disproportionate burden of not only toxic waste facilities, but air pollution, lead poisoning, pesticide poisoning, and garbage dumps. Several years ago, this same issue brought together only a handful of people. Today, 3 buses were loaded up to take a tour through Louisiana's notorious Cancer Alley. It's all part of a conference organized by the Southern Organizing Committee for Economic and Social Justice. The first part of the tour took the group through this housing project on the East Bank of New Orleans. The guides talked about how this neighborhood was established before the sewage treatment plant, which you can see in their backyard.
This is the major sewage treatment plant for Jefferson Parish in this area. The housing project, which we just came through, it's low-income housing. The housing project was there first. Then the sewage treatment plant was built later. So we just say it's a continuation of the trend of putting these unwanted land uses in communities that are powerless.
If you have any questions...
Officials with the sewer plant took them on a tour so that the group might understand their position.
Any questions, you can ask me. My name is Joyce, and I'll be able to answer as much as I can.
One thing that New Orleans is really a leader in, a lot of folks don't know.
The environmental tour guide was quick to point out what the plant officials didn't.
It's a real problem. The city of New Orleans is below sea level. So all the rain that falls in the city of New Orleans is collected and pumped out of the city into Lake Pontchartrain. Every place we've got a canal that goes out into the lake that's pumped out of the city, we have toxic problems.
And while there were light-hearted moments at times, people were serious about why they were here and how this tour could help them deal with their own environmental problems at home.
Environmental justice is a concept that we need to have since we're finding nationwide, and not only nationwide but internationally, this tendency to put unwanted land uses, chemical plants, sewage treatment plants, incinerators, landfills in poor communities, that we need to have some kind of equity and justice about this. We need to make sure that we stop that kind of inequitable treatment, that the communities that are bearing these extra risks and burdens are in some way get some justice out of the situation.
In the West Bank town of Wallace, citizens groups successfully fought for Mosa Plastics' plan to build yet another chemical factory.
What was proposed to be a major new petrochemical industry coming to the state, built right next to a small African-American community. We've seen other communities destroyed by these type of industries, and we want to see some kind of justice. We are aware that Louisiana needs economic development, job development, and what we think is that the state is looking at economic development in the wrong way.
This Union Carbide plant is just one of 134 petrochemical industries that have sprung up along the corridor between New Orleans and Baton Rouge without a lot of controls. It wasn't until 1988 that a national environmental policy took effect and required businesses to start telling us what they were releasing.
For years, the industry said, oh, we've cut back, way back, we only have to deal with the last 5 or 10% of the pollution. It's going to cost so much. When the first toxic release inventories came out, turned out Louisiana was, the industries in Louisiana discharged more toxics into the environment than any other state in the country, way above anybody else. And number 2 was Texas, number 3 was just way behind us. So we find out even with all these claims, and the industry's claim, they were shocked by those numbers, and so was EPA.
The tour was only a small part of a large environmental justice conference that was held over the weekend. Hundreds later joined this group for workshops and discussions about how industrial development and waste disposal has impacted poor and minority communities.
I personally have been very impressed by seeing the magnitude of the chemical industries here. We have one major chemical industry up in our area that causes a lot of pollution. But the magnitude here and the obvious degradation of the land and the the impact on the communities here is just very very distressing.
It's good to see it firsthand, and the impact of this great industrial society. You know that they're really being destructive to the Mother Earth, and. You know, this is the Mississippi River with our native people. This Mississippi River is grandfather river. It's the lifeline of our Mother Earth, of this portion of the continent, and it's extremely polluted. So, you know, I'm concerned about that. You know, coming from upstream, you know, we come from a pristine environment up there at the headwaters, and here, you know, I might go back and tell our people to cut off the water supply. They don't know how to take care of the water.
I think that we are sharing experiences, and it's good to know that others out there, anywhere, are doing something similar, that we are not alone in the struggle, and that we can learn and share these experiences. Although we have different contexts, we have to consider that also. But there are common links, common solutions, and common roots that are joining us in this big effort to save our planet, because this is a matter of life and death, and that's what we are here, because we are committed to this.
That bus tour made headlines around the country, and with us to talk a bit more about its impact is Willie Fontenot from the State Attorney General's office. Willie's someone we often call upon to talk about specifics in the chemical and environmental areas. Willie, we welcome you to the program, and understand you, besides having your title of environmental specialist with the Attorney General's office, where you've been for 15 years, for this tour, you had the new title of tour guide.
Yes.
How was it that you got to be chosen for that? Do you know?
Well, I've been working with environmental groups for more than 20 years throughout Louisiana, and have been asked a number of times to work with individuals, groups, and the media, going out and helping them look at environmental problems, to understand them a little better. And I've given a number of tours like this.
The person who is executive director for the Louisiana Chemical Association, Dan Bornet, was he not available?
I don't know if they asked him. I mean, I got called a couple of nights before the conference, and they asked me if I'd come and fill in on a tour bus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the question is was half serious and half joking.
Dan would have probably given him a little different tour, though very important perspective, because you need to know what goes on in the plants and what they're doing and what they add to the community, as well as what the adverse impacts are.
It seems that from R.C. Chapa's story, that the people who came here had a pretty good idea of where they wanted to end up after the tour. Was that your impression?
Well, I think most of the people who came to a conference concerned about social as well as environmental problems, and it's really for many of them the first time they had even gotten close to a chemical plant or inside of a sewage treatment plant to sort of see, you know, what's going on. And I think they left Louisiana with a different impression. But it was very important because there were folks from across the United States. And the first time I had met many people that I've worked with through the years over the telephone.
I guess it would be easy for me, being somebody who's spent my whole life in Louisiana, to go to some other part of the country and say, gee, things are really terrible here. You guys ought to fix this. Was there a lot of that?
I think what happened more was that people said, gosh, you know, this is the first time I've really looked at the environmental issues. And the way I tried to present it on this tour was to tell them to think about their own situations at home, because there's no community in the United States that doesn't have some significant environmental problems, whether it might be from traffic or sewage or land use problems, whatever. And so it's an opportunity to say, here are some very serious and sort of obvious problems, but there are a lot more that we don't deal with because we just can't see them.
Did you point out anything to them that we are doing right in Louisiana?
Well, yeah. Louisiana has, first, probably more citizens groups working on more environmental problems than any other state in the country. We have excellent laws and regulations. We have very large environmental programs like in the Department of Environmental Quality and other agencies. Even the environmental section in the Attorney General's office is something that's not found in many other states. And so we've made a major commitment to try and deal with these problems. And the industries are making major commitments, even though a lot of it is they have to be pushed. And they'll say, you know, we're not going to do it unless you push us. But a lot of it is people getting involved. And the media has been very good in Louisiana, which we pointed out, and having LPB on this tour is part of it, very, very involved in trying to help the public understand what the problems are.
You know, one of the things that concerns me is anytime somebody makes a sweeping indictment, like just the term Cancer Alley, immediately makes me say, well, that's too simple a term. And the studies, the people who have done some actual research trying to pinpoint what's going on with health problems have not turned up evidence of any significant change in the health of the people that live around the plants, to my knowledge. Why do we still get stuck with that terrible indictment?
Well, I think at some level it's a misnomer, because there are many other places in the country where you have equal or greater amounts of petrochemicals that are not getting that label, such as in the Houston area, which has a much larger petrochemical complex. What Louisiana has is some of the largest emissions or releases of toxic and hazardous materials in the country. And so people say, well, if there's toxic and hazardous things going into the air, land, and water, it must be really bad, which it is. And we do have some significant cancer rates for certain types of cancer, and there seems to be some clusters along the river, but we really haven't done the studies, any kind of definitive studies, to look at the cause and effects. There have been some limited studies, and there's some proposals out there to do some studies, but it's difficult to look at a release into the environment and determine how it's affecting people's health 10 or 20 years later.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the things I had thought about was that the big study within the last year or so about women who became pregnant and were living in an area where there was a concentration of chemical industry, mm-hmm. and the speculation was, everybody's presumption was that there was going to be a severe health impact on those women, and from what I recall, the study said that was not the case.
Well, that was a study in the community of St. Gabriel, just south of Baton Rouge, and the study was actually limited to looking at whether or not there was an increase over a national average of miscarriages in that community. And then if they found what looked like an abnormal number, then they would proceed to see whether or not there were any adverse environmental, say, problems like chemical releases that might have triggered it. And the numbers were inconclusive. Based on, the scientists who did this study, they said that, even going into it, that based on the few people that we have to include in this study, our report is going to be inconclusive. So they knew going in that it was not going to give us that information.
But again,
so we're left with a big question mark.
Yeah, but I guess my concern is that although it's easy to use a term like Cancer Alley, no one has come up with the hard numbers and done the hard science to back that up.
there's a lot of good information out there, but it has not been terms of, in this parish or in this community, we can conclusively say that these particular problems, whether it's, say, pesticide use or chemicals or automobile exhaust, whatever, have caused these severe health problems.
Well, I have a suspicion that we'll call upon you again in the future to revisit this topic again. Willie Fontenot from the Attorney General's office, thank you very much.
Robert, real pleasure.
Okay.